Last lesson of the unit, we're going to take a look at squaring and square rooting variables. So our first example, we've got the quantity 5ab squared. And similar to yesterday when we distributed the square to our fractions, we can distribute the square inside a parentheses if it's all multiplication or division. If you see a plus or a minus sign, you cannot distribute the square. Since I don't see a plus or minus sign, I'm going to square my 5 and get 25. I'm going to square my a and get a squared. And I'm going to square my b and get b squared. Second example is a little bit more complicated, but the first thing that I want you to remember is that anytime you square a number, your answer is positive. So when I square my negative, it becomes positive. So I really don't even have to worry about that. Now I'm going to take a look at squaring x cubed. Remember what it means to square something. Multiply it by itself. Now I'm going to show you this the long way. Even though we've done multiplication of variables, I just want to remind you of why this works. So x cubed is x times x times x, and x cubed is x times x times x, and we end up with x times x times x times x times x times x 6 times, so we get x to the 6th. Let's take a look at that one more time with our y to the 5th when I square that, and then we'll talk about the shortcut. So y to the 5th squared means y to the 5th times itself, which the long way, my first one is y times itself 5 times, and my second one is y times itself 5 times, and I end up with y times itself 10 times. So let's take a look at our exponents and see if there's a faster way to do this. I started with x cubed, and when I squared it, I ended up with x to the 6th. So looking at those exponents, we multiplied them together. Same for my y's. Y to the 5th squared is 5 times 2, or 10. Square rooting. You can only take the square root and get a nice answer if the variable has an even power. Because think about, I'm going to jump back to the first page real quick. Think about what we did when we squared. On the second one in particular, we always were multiplying by 2. Anytime you multiply by 2, you get an even number, because only even numbers have 2 as a factor. So essentially what we're going to do to square root is divide by 2, because square rooting is the opposite of squaring. So my first one, I'm going to take the square root of 400. Square root of 4 is 2. I'm going to cut the zeros in half. We learned that trick yesterday. Square root of m squared is m. I'm going to cut the exponent in half. And the square root of n to the 4th is m squared. Again, I'm going to cut that exponent in half. So thinking about if this doesn't make sense, let's square it and show you that it gets us back what we started with. 20 squared, 2 times 2 is 4. And doubling the number of zeros, we get 400. Distributing the square to my m, we get m squared. And then remember the rule, when you raise a power to a power, you multiply the exponents. So n squared squared is n to the 4th, which is what we had under the square root. One last example, square root of 1600 is 40 because the square root of 16 is 4 and we cut the zeros in half. And then we just have to cut the exponents in half. Half of 8 is 4. Half of 16 is 8. And a couple of U-try problems.